Hey, Shalom. Shalom. Give me a second to get this camera situated. All right, Shalom. I want to start off by giving all praise, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahashim Yahusha, Bahashim Rakakwadash. I want to give double honors to our apostles and elders of Great Millstone who rule well, in grace and peace to you elect around the four winds, believing and pushing this truth in all sincerity. May the blessing of election be upon your houses. This is your fellow servant, Rokalia from the GMS Orlando camp, coming at you with another impromptu lesson. The title of tonight's lesson is There Are Greater Evils at Hand. All right, stay vigilant or remain vigilant. And tonight's lesson is inspired by, some recent events that have, transpired, globally. You have this whole psyop going on with the death of this guy, CK. You have these different Jakes who have been found, getting put to death in grievous ways, hanging in the middle of college campuses. You have the skirmishes, over overseas, getting hotter and hotter, you know, and then seeing all these things, it's important to remain vigilant, all right, because there are greater evils at hand than what are present, and right now, a lot of people are distracted. A lot of people in this world, especially these Americans, these Babylonians, are distracted by the everyday life of Babylon. The rat race, work, money, entertainment, bread and circus, basically. The same thing that was happening in ancient Rome. These people are occupied in bread and circus, and they're forbearing a lot of the turmoil that's taking place around them. Because as we speak, this devil's grip on the earth is getting tighter. We understand, pursuing Revelation 12 and 12, that the devil is getting ready to come down with great wrath. Why? Because he knows that he has but a short time. All right, and just like we, the men of Yahweh Bashim Yahushai, can see that this devil's kingdom is coming to a close, the elites of the society can see it as well. And that's why they're coming out with these different psyops and these different legislations, to really make their move and their mark in the earth. And according to prophecy, we understand that these things are ultimately, they're not going to be able to be fulfilled in their entirety, because the Lord is going to put a stop to it. And ultimately, as men of the Lord, as we foresee the evil, we prepare ourselves mentally and spiritually for what's getting ready to take place. All right, and what's getting ready to take place is calamity. A lot of destruction is getting ready to take place, especially here in America, Babylon the Great. And it's important, as brothers and sisters as well, to stay vigilant, remain vigilant, especially in the times that we're in right now. But one of the first precepts that came to mind when I was meditating on this earlier was this here in 2nd Esdras chapter 14. And give me a second. You know how the pages be stuck together. This is 2nd Esdras chapter 14. And I'm going to start at verse 10. It says, "For the world has lost its youth, and the times begin to wax old." All right, and the times are waxing older. We aren't in the 70s. We aren't in the same old America where a man can have one job and sustain a whole family of four. We're not in the time to where you can send your children out, at the crack of dawn, 3 o'clock in the evening, 4 o'clock in the evening, send them out to the street lights come on. We're not in that time no more. We're not in the time of these elaborate celebrations, these elaborate holiday celebrations and huge family gatherings. That time and that spirit is long gone. We're not in the same time as we were 5 years ago, before this whole pandemic happened, before number 19 happened. The world has changed drastically and the times have waxed old. All right, 2nd Esdras 14 and 10, it says, "For the world has lost its youth, and the times begin to wax old. For the world is divided into 12 parts, and the 10 parts of it are gone already, and half of the 10th part." All right, so half of the 10th part of the world had already passed during the time of Esdras. So how much the more us here in these latter days? All right, we're in the 12th part, damn near in the latter end of the 12th part, where the Lord is getting ready to lay down the kingdoms of this world and establish the kingdom of heaven in righteousness. All right, with Yahweh Shai sitting at the top of that throne. All right, King David and 144,000 under them. All right, we're coming into that time. All right, we're coming into the time of the destruction of Esau, Edom. We're coming into the time of 2nd Esdras 6 and verse 9, where Esau was said to be the end of the world, and Jacob was said to be the beginning of it that followeth. All right, we're approaching those times. It says, and there remaineth that which is after the half of the 10th part. Now therefore, set thine house in order and reprove thy people. Comfort such as them as be in trouble, and now renounce corruption. All right, now is the time for us that are hopefully elect to really be setting our houses in order. You know, when it's speaking about your house, first and foremost, you're speaking about yourself. You know, you yourself have to be set in order first in order to control anything around you. In order to control anything around you, you yourself have to be on point. You know, a lot of jakes, you know, like to learn the truth and then think they can go out and command these women just because they got this newfound knowledge, and it doesn't work that way. You know, a woman is not going to follow you just because you know a few precepts. You know, a woman's going to follow you because of the spirit that radiates off of you. You know, that natural born leader spirit that radiates off of a man once he's been exercised in wisdom and exercised in understanding and has experience in leading himself first and foremost. You know, excuse me. You know, a man of discipline, which is what the Lord is training up now. Men of discipline, men of integrity and order. You know, that's why the Lord said again, now therefore set thine house in order and reprove thy people. Comfort such as them as be in trouble, and now renounce corruption. Let go from the mortal thoughts, cast away the burdens of man, and put off now the weak nature. All right, and now's the time to put off the weak nature, man. You know, I speak to brothers every chance I get about this. You know, brothers joke about it, but it's serious, man. You know, we not in the time for no weak shit. That weak shit has to take a back seat. You know, we understand what we're facing. You know, the Lord has put us on the front lines of this battle for a reason. You know, the Lord has given us this wisdom and this testimony for a reason, to carry it with boldness, like our forefathers. You know, like the men before us, like Yahweh Shai himself. All right, we're supposed to carry this word and this testimony with boldness, man. You know, not saying that we're not going to have, you know, moments of uncertainty and fear. But ultimately, that uncertainty and fear is not going to overtake us, Lord willing, we're the elect. You know, we're being exercised in the boldness and the confidence of Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai. And really, everything in this world takes a back seat to this testimony, man, and to this word. Women, houses, money, cars, the luxuries of this life. You know, all of that takes a back seat to this testimony, because this testimony is really the hottest thing going in the planet Earth, man. You know, and I'm gonna take a walk down here, get a scenery of this river, you know, while I'm talking, you know, while I'm getting into it. You know, Jake love the sceneries and shit. We're gonna set up over here. But all of that takes a back seat to what the Lord has in store, you know, for not only the world, but the men that are carrying this testimony and faithfulness and sincerity. You know, the Lord has a lot in store for the men of integrity, you know. But back in 2nd Esdras, chapter 14 and verse 5, it says, and set aside the thoughts that are most heavy unto thee, and haste thee to flee from these times. For yet greater evils than those which thou hast seen happen shall be done hereafter. All right, and there are greater evils, you know, than what we see present, getting ready to happen hereafter. You know, right now, there are greater evils, you know, at hand than what the average American perceives. A lot of these people, really don't understand the the science behind the moves that Esau Edom is making here in these latter days, especially with the death of this guy CK. Really, it's an attack on so-called freedom of speech, which is really playing into the prophecy of Amos 8 and 11. In Second Ezra, the fifth chapter, going into the famine of the word. And the Lord stripping this word from off the internet and from off the highways and byways. Ultimately, we're approaching that time to where these elite, this word has done too much damage. It's done too much damage to this kingdom. It's put people in a state of mind that's not conducive to the lifestyle of and the enterprise of Babylon the Great. We're in this great awakening age, and that's not conducive for Esau. You know, Therefore, he's setting things in motion to take us off from the internet and take us off from the highways and byways, and ultimately shut up the prophets, which he doesn't understand that that's all prophecy from the Heavenly Father, anyways. All right, the Lord foretold, that He would do go about and do that anyways. But these are there's a greater play at hand. You know, there's also a greater play at hand on demonizing, this truth in general, and brothers who have the testimony of Yahweh Shai. Us being linked to domestic teas. Men who are inciting uproars and riots, in society. Which the same accusation came to the Jews back in the ancient world, in ancient Rome. That same accusation. And it's nothing different. You know, it's nothing different. The same accusation is coming here in these other days. Hey, how you doing? I'm good. How you doing? You know, it's nothing new. It's nothing new. Um, just had Esau, Esau come up. Uh, wherever the spirit of the Lord is, the devil got to try to creep in somehow. Um, 2 Ezra 14:16, for yet greater evils than those that have seen happen shall be done hereafter. With this said, really, what the scriptures, do for us and allow us to do is prep ourselves spiritually and mentally. The Lord has given us this truth ultimately so that we might have a different fate from the rest of this world. Brothers weren't given the truth to be condemned, to fall to the wiles of the devil like the rest of this world. The Lord gave us a fighting chance through the preaching of this word. We have a fighting chance understanding the greater scheme of things, understanding the bigger picture. Or we're able to put the pieces together and prepare ourselves. Which true preparation comes through the Spirit. As we're learning, true preparation comes through the Spirit. All right, being prepped through the Spirit and power of Yahweh by Shem Yahweh Shai and trusting in the Lord. That's the ultimate form of preparation. And seeing these things come down the pipeline is really further confirmation that the words of the Lord are solid, and that the power that we serve is really a man of His word, man. Hey, Shalom, Makim Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shai Brakatham. Shalom. Shalom. Khan. Yeah, bro. Yeah. Like the scene. Yeah. Jake love the scenes and shit. The Lord is beautiful, man. Even in the midst of the valley of the shadow of death, there are pockets of beauty, that really you shouldn't skip over. Give glory to the Lord for the different pockets of beauty that we do witness in the valley of the shadow of death. It reminds us that the Lord is greater than all of this bullshit. As much as Esau has toiled to destroy this world, the Lord still has pockets of beauty left to show His power. But let me see. I was gonna grab one more and then I'm gonna close it out in 1 Peter chapter 5 and verse 8. Let me set this down real quick. This is 1 Peter chapter 5. And this is a precept that's been brought out a few times recently, you know, a few times recently, going into vigilance, and remaining vigilant concerning the times and the concerning the times and the scenery we find ourselves in. You know, this is our First Peter chapter 5 verse 8. It says, "Be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary the devil, as a roaring lion, walketh about seeking whom he may devour." And now this precept speaks more so than ever. Esau is trying to devour everyone that's not paying attention, and he is devouring the majority of our people. He's devouring them in these different psyops, these different red flags, these different uh, false media outlets. He's devouring a lot of our people because they're not paying attention to the true news and the true media that's coming through the spirit of Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushai. But for us who are the household of faith, the Lord told us to remain sober and vigilant. Sober meaning spiritually sober, not drunken with these different philosophies and these different ideologies outside of the truth. Remain sober and remain steadfast in what we've been taught and been assured of, like it says in 2 Timothy. All right, remain steadfast. 1 Timothy, so like, remain steadfast in what we've been taught and been assured of. Because what we've been taught and assured of is conducive to our salvation and is playing out in reality. So we have nothing really to look back to. It says, "Be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, as a roaring lion, walketh about seeking whom he may devour." All right, and those are the ones, like it says, where the Lord is going to come as a thief into the night to those who are not paying attention. To those who are devoured by Satan. Those are the ones who the Lord is ultimately coming as a thief in the night to, man, because they're not paying attention. They're not being vigilant. They're not paying attention to the greater evils, the greater picture that the Lord has at hand. They're being caught up in all the wiles of the devil, and not and not embracing, the entirety of the scriptures, the entirety of prophecy. This world is in this society is getting ready to get a whole lot worse for these people, especially. For the Lord's elect, there's getting ready to be a whole lot of deliverance, a whole lot of deliverance and mercy that's going to be had, because some men have to have the testimony in the kingdom. It's prophesied that some men won't even die on this side of life. That's going to play out for a lot of men, and for a lot of men, being put to death is going to play out. But either way it goes, we understand that the Lord is in every aspect of our journey. For those who have to be put to death for this testimony, and for those who are preordained and predestined to live, for the Lord in these latter days. The Lord is in every aspect of our life, and we have to remain vigilant, while the Lord unfolds this movie. But with that being said, that's all I had. Lord, when it's edifying unto you elect, I want to give all praise, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahashem Yahushua, Bahashem Rokakodash, and double honors to our apostles and elders of Great Millstone who rule well in grace and peace to you elect around the four winds, believing and pushing this truth in all sincerity. May the blessing of election be upon your houses. Shalom. Stay up.